Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Marcuscio, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at Sequentur. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar and covering a topic that seems to be at the forefront of a lot of discussions these days, AI and cybersecurity. And we're happy and thankful to have so many of you joining on a Friday afternoon. Today's discussion, and that's what we hope it's going to be, not just a straight presentation, but a discussion. We'll explore the innovative techniques and strategies offered by AI, how it works, the benefits, some of its uses, and there'll be a big focus on Microsoft Copilot. And we'll see how these AI-driven solutions can significantly enhance your security posture. For those who haven't had the chance to meet Chris, we're lucky to have Sequentur CISO Christopher Capps with us today to lead the discussion. I'd like to share a little bit of his background. Chris has a ton of experience implementing and maintaining the NIST cybersecurity framework and SOC 2 certifications for Sequentur and our clients. He has a very strong business acumen and engineering background, and as you'll see today, great communication skills that allows him to bridge the gap between complex technical concepts and making them clearer and more understandable, especially for non-technical audiences like me. So I appreciate that, Chris. Here at Sequentur, he manages a very talented team of engineers, included 24/7 security ops center. He has MS degrees in cybersecurity and digital forensics and the Certified Information System Security Professional from ISC2. And he's working on his PhD in cybersecurity with a focus on governance, risk management, and compliance. I'm not sure how he finds the time for all of it, but it's extremely impressive.
Brian, definitely appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for joining us. As Brian mentioned, we're going to discuss how Copilot is transforming the cybersecurity landscape. I will touch briefly on the general uses of Copilot in 365. It is very helpful for all types of teams, but specifically, we do want to focus on the cybersecurity uses in this webinar. So, let's talk about what artificial intelligence and machine learning are. Artificial intelligence is essentially a simulation of human intelligence in machines. It's been the buzzword of choice for the last 6-8 months, as it were. It's definitely going to change the way we interact with machines. It's going to change the way we interact with our data. Definitely going to help, but it is also going to pose some challenges and risks associated with the technology. Machine learning essentially is a subset of AI that involves the training of the algorithms and data to improve the performance over time without being explicitly programmed. So it's essentially allowing these technologies to learn unsupervised on a subset of data that they've been given. Some of the benefits of integrating Copilot into cybersecurity strategies include enhanced threat detection, improved incident response time, proactive defense techniques, reducing the workload for security teams, adaptive learning, vulnerability management, and policy guidance. Something I'd like to point out here is that the overarching theme with all of these conversations are going to be doing more with less, right? So these technologies are going to allow teams to conduct investigations faster, more efficiently, more effectively, with less errors. And they're going to allow you to evaluate the environments, right? Evaluate your compliance policies and your configurations. We'll get into that more as it goes along, but just wanted to throw that out there that really the theme is to be able to empower your teams to do more with less. So let's talk about some of those benefits that we just went over. So with enhanced threat detection, Copilot can swiftly analyze large data sets across your environment to identify anomalies and potential threats in real time that might be missed by traditional methods. So instead of a single analyst going through and, starting to look at an email and then looking at the sign-in logs and then looking at the activity, this technology allows you to essentially look at all of these things across the environment all at the same time. It helps identify patterns of behavior across the environment. It also increases the incident response or decreases the incident response time. So Copilot can help your teams to automate responses to certain types of cyber incidents, reducing the time between detection and mitigation. So think security orchestration, automation, and response techniques. You can build in processes to where Copilot can just automatically handle suspicious logins. Let's say I've got a user that logged in from both China and Miami at the same time. Not inherently possible. Let's go ahead and take action on that, figure out what's going on in the back end, right, to eliminate that risk. Proactive defense. So similar conversation here. The proactive defense is it enables predictive analytics, allowing organizations to anticipate and prepare for potential cyber threats before they occur. So preeminent action, right? So we are going to set up the environment in such a way that it is going to take care of anything that it can identify for us without having to have human interaction. All of these technologies are going to reduce the workload for the security teams. As I mentioned, they reach out across all of your 365 products. I think there's 117 different Copilot integrations. That's not all security, but just across the whole environment. It does incorporate itself into Intune and Azure and Entra ID and your Defender modules that you may have in place in your environment. And you can use it, you can leverage it to gather information quickly. You can leverage it to get guidance on best practices regarding your policies. You can leverage it to get general security information. So all of these are going to help to reduce the workload for security teams. Something else to mention here, not only is it reducing the workload, but it is reducing the skills gap. So security is definitely a niche field, and these tools are going to allow teams to utilize people that may not have strong security backgrounds, but are skilled, capable engineers to get in here and close the gap between that knowledge, right? So your teams can get in here and ask questions about, what the security CIA triad is, or what a specific vulnerability exposure is, right? So it absolutely can not only reduce the workload, but also reduce the skills gap for the security teams. It does do adaptive learning. It continuously learns from your data. It continuously learns from past incidents and engagements, right? So essentially, and I'm using this very loosely, but essentially think of it as training your AI for your 365 environment. There is an option to actually do so. It's called Copilot Studio. You can get in and build your own copilots, right? And extend it far beyond just security operations. It does help with vulnerability management. It can provide you information about known vulnerabilities that may affect your system. It does tie into the Defender for Endpoint, Defender Threat Management, all of the threat intelligence items that you get through 365. It does tie into those and can pull information from those as well. And as mentioned, for the policy guidance. So Copilot can help provide information about best practices for security policies, helping those teams, again, at bridging that security skills gap, helping those teams configure policies to best control your environment. I'm going to stop here for a second. Anybody have any comments, questions?
Yeah, Chris, we have one question in the chat from Stephen Brown asking if can Copilot be used on desktop Word or Excel?
Yeah, so it absolutely can be used for any of your 365 applications. It builds it so once the license is acquired and applied, it takes roughly 24 hours for it to deploy to everything. But through your 365 app deployment in Microsoft, right, in Microsoft Cloud, you can get Copilot inside of Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, any of those desktop applications that you'd normally use inside of 365. Does that help? Do the Copilot prompts keep the data with your tenant? We're worried about external use of proprietary data. Yes. And they have the data policies fully spelled out, but your data, your prompts, your sessions is what they call them, are never used to train other people's AI, right? So that information does stay siloed inside of your environment.
Hey, Chris, Stephen had a follow-up. He said my question was not using Microsoft 365. So can Copilot be used on desktop Word or Excel not using Microsoft 365?
So my understanding right now is Copilot is available through the 365 deployed applications. We can definitely follow up and get you an answer for it, but I'm fairly certain you have to be going through the the cloud deployment, if you will, to be able to use Copilot.
And Mark Graves has another question, Chris. Unclear, does Copilot for Microsoft 365 cover Power BI, or must you get Copilot for Fabric? Horrible naming conventions.
Yeah. Microsoft is very notorious for playing the name games. So I do not immediately know the answer to that question. I don't deal a whole lot with Power BI, but we can absolutely get you the answer to that question. All right. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so key areas where Copilot is transforming cybersecurity. So threat detection and prevention. So AI in general, right, is increasing the effectiveness and the efficiency with which we can do pretty much anything. That is no different with the cybersecurity environment. So the AI-powered threat intelligence and predictive analytics help increase the abilities for teams and systems to detect and prevent threats. It also enhances the real-time monitoring and anomaly detection. It does this by corroborating signals across multiple environments, right? So the same example of a single analyst trying to work through an investigation, we're looking at one thing at a time, whereas the AI engine can go through and look at 12 things at a time and put all of those signals together for a holistic picture. It can help increase the incident and response management times, or decrease the incident and response and management times. By facilitating automated incident response system, teams are able to do more, again, with less. They're able to manage the environment instead of manage the incident, if that makes sense, right? So my teams are worried about making sure the environment is configured, functioning, evaluating, key flag data, but for the most part, the system is what's doing most of the work. Again, it reduces response times and improves accuracy. So we are all human. We all make mistakes. Our eyes are not all the best, right? So you generally don't have that problem with artificial intelligence engines. You do have to worry about hallucination. So you still have to make sure that the output that you're getting is correct and that it's not made up. So a lot of times the people using AI, not only are they prompt engineers, but they are fact checkers of sorts, right? So you have to know what you're looking at to evaluate if that output is correct. And then for endpoint security, so as more and more AI technologies get deployed, they will begin to creep into the endpoint detection systems. The Copilot specifically does tie into Defender for Endpoint. So if you have Defender for Endpoint employed in your environment, you can use it to facilitate those endpoint protections more rapidly. And it helps detect and isolate compromised devices faster. Specifically, Copilot does tie it. So as I mentioned, it does tie into the Defender for Endpoint, but it also ties into Intune. So if you're managing your devices inside of Intune, you can use Copilot to evaluate your compliance policies and evaluate the status of a given device, etc. So the way Copilot works, I saw a really good demo on this where they stood up Copilot and they stood up a Chat GPT instance without, the 365 data. And while you can get some information, you cannot get the level of granularity that you need. And I'm not talking about your 365 tenant. They presented the two environments with something as simple as looking up a common vulnerability numbers, a CVE number. The ChatGPT instance was unable to define what the CVE was and identify its exposures, but it knew what a CVE was. Copilot, however, was able to reference a vulnerability database, pull back the CVE information, and explain why it was a vulnerability inside of the environment. So the way Copilot works inside of 365 in general, so the human is going to submit a prompt just like you would with any other AI engine, and Copilot for Security is going to take over. What it does is it identifies the request, determines a plan of action to evaluate that request. It goes through all of the plugins associated with your environment. By default, generally speaking, you're going to have just 365 data sources, but you can also plug in third-party data sources. You can also upload, for instance, your policies and procedures to allow Copilot to reference against those as well. Once it identifies the plugins that are capable of providing data, it analyzes all the data from those plugins and develops a response, right? And that response is going to consolidate all of the information that it's gathered and provide it in the context of your request. So this is where prompt engineering is very important. We could probably have a whole webinar just on prompt engineering, but I guess the simplest way to put it is you have to ask it for exactly what you want. And sometimes you have to mold those responses in order to get the data out. I'm going to back up a step. Let's talk about costs for Copilot for Security. Unlike the Copilot for 365, there are no direct licensing costs associated with Copilot for Security. The way Copilot for Security is billed is basically on security compute units, which is a funny term that they came up with to identify how many tokens you are putting through the environment, right? So if you're familiar with prompt engineering in ChatGPT, every character has a set number of tokens, and then your whole prompt has a total number of tokens. And so when you go through and configure, you tell it what you are allowing your analyst to use, and it will give you up to that usage, and then you get billed on that usage. The licensing comes into play when you're talking about the individual plugins, right? So if I want to ingest information from Defender for Endpoint, I have to have the licensing for Defender for Endpoint. So, something to consider there. There is a cost associated with Copilot for Security. It's really the Azure data analytics and ingestion. It's not inherently a licensing cost.
I just want to pause here for a second, Chris, if anybody has any comments or questions. I think we're good, Chris.
All right. I will gladly take that opportunity to get a drink. All right. So what does this mean for us, right? Everyday IT users, everyday IT admins. Well, essentially it turns questions into action, right? We talk about prompt engineering. You can ask Copilot for Security questions in natural speaking language and receive actionable responses to common security and IT tasks in seconds. So with security operations all the way through IT management, right? You can get various info associated with incidents, device configurations, user risk profiles, um, all sorts of information related to your 365 tenant and the plugins that you have. And you can use that, right? So if you just think of it as an information gatherer, you can cut an exponential number of minutes off of just finding out information, because instead of having to hunt, you can ask and it'll return it in a couple seconds. You can also use it to manage vulnerabilities and expedite investigations within the environment. So let's say you go into Copilot for security, you ask them what is my latest security incident, and it's going to rattle off a whole bunch of details. And then you can continue to drill down into it. Let's say it was an email, right? A malicious email that got through the system. Well, tell me if somebody interacted with that email. It will go and run a KQL query to determine if anybody in your environment actually engaged with that email, right? So it helps make those type of investigations far faster simply by being able to ask questions. So this slide is kind of going over how it benefits a variety of teams. So human ingenuity and expertise will always be an irreplaceable component to security. But we do need the technology that can augment these capabilities with the skill sets, processing speeds, and rapid learning of AI. So this is really reiterating my comment about doing more with less. It will allow your existing teams to act as if they had, another 3 or 4 people on their team. So for security analysts, as I mentioned, it can help build hunting queries in KQL from natural language. So instead of having to learn the KQL language, you can now just ask a question and it will generate that query for you. You can get threat intel insights related to specific incidents, not only in the environment, but also in the general cybersecurity landscape. Let's say there's a vulnerability that you want to know about, but doesn't necessarily affect you. You can ask Copilot for security. It will help analyze malicious scripts with one button click. So what you can do if there is a malicious payload that is in the environment or anything like that, you can query it about that event and then ask it to explain to you essentially what the attack path was, right? What the script is doing, what it's trying to do, et cetera. And it will outline and provide a visual for you. You can get remediation guidance. So if we're talking about the vulnerabilities, let's say you've identified a vulnerability, you've got your summary on it. You can then say, how do I fix this, right? How do I fix this in my environment? What do I need to do? And it will give you those guidances. And it also helps to create comprehensive incident reports for leadership. So you can use it in combination with the data processing tools, Word, Excel, Power BI. I know it plugs into Dynamics, right? You can use it to help create reports across multiple systems, not just for security incidents. For IT admins, right? So we talk about security and then we talk about IT administration. So I mentioned previously, it does hook up into Intune. So if you have your devices inside of Intune, you can determine if the device is compliant with company policies. You can get advice on, configuring and managing the new platforms. You can help build new policies and test them to see how they would impact users. So you can essentially get what if running through your Copilot to see if I make this configuration change, how would it affect my existing devices? It can help you proactively identify devices that are not up to date, not fully patched, not compliant. Maybe the apps aren't deployed and you want to know why. It can also help understand risk profiles for a user, understand why MFA was triggered, help you understand that user's account behavior. Definitely facilitates, again, the information grabbing. If nothing else, right, it facilitates the information grabbing and makes that process faster, and that's going to help everybody. Go ahead and pause there for a second if anybody's got a question. All right. So let's kind of sum it up. What can Microsoft Copilot and Copilot for Security do for you? Well, one, it can catch what others miss, right? It summarizes vast data signals into key insights to cut through the noise, detect threats before they cause harm, and reinforce your security posture. And it helps your security teams and your IT teams by being that extra man on the field. It will definitely help you outpace adversaries. Understand that regardless of whether you adopt artificial intelligence or not, the threat actors absolutely are, and they will continue to use it. And if you are not using it, all you are doing is giving them that edge. And it will strengthen team expertise. So not just for security teams, but all teams in general, right? You can use it to bridge the skills gap for any of your IT teams, right? But specifically cybersecurity, there's a huge skills gap in the industry, and you absolutely can use it to subsidize that. All right, so we really did want to kind of open it up, see if anybody had any thoughts, questions, comments, and concerns. I have covered most of these points in the next couple of slides ad nauseum, and really want to open it up. If you have anything, I'll go ahead and leave it open for a minute. If not, I will go through the rest of the slides, and we can sum it up at the end. All right. If nobody's got a question, I'll ask one. Maybe throw it in the chat. Have any of you all started dabbling with Copilot for 365 or Copilot for Security? Have you looked at any of the other Copilot options? As I mentioned, there's like 117 integrations, and there's Copilot for Sales and Copilot for Service and Copilot for Finance. And as I mentioned, you can build your own. All right, so we got one. Amy Jones looking at Copilot for 365. Excellent. So I'll talk about that for a minute. A group of the executives here at Sequentur have been using Copilot for 365 for a little while now, and it has proven very beneficial, again, in the information gathering, right? So if we're on a call with a team or a prospect or a vendor or any of that, right? Copilot can help summarize not only the content of the conversation, but it can provide action items. It can put names to those action items. So, if we come out of a meeting with 4 or 5 things that need to be done, and there's 4 or 5 different people that need to handle them, you can actually ask Copilot to summarize in a table and apply the person to the action and get that, directly from the meeting. It definitely helps with communication. It provides faster ways to summarize long emails. So let's say you've got the 2-page email from your CEO, and you want to know what's notable about it, right? You want the quick and dirty, if you will. You can ask it to summarize the email that came through, provide you your action items, provide you with anything that you need to follow up on. It can even provide you the sentiment of that email to let you know if your CEO is happy or frustrated or upset, etc. Definitely the transcription for meetings and calls, very helpful. We've been using that a lot lately. There's really the limit to what you can do with these technologies is your creativity. And that's essentially what it boils down to. So something that I have not yet touched on is the ethics and the privacy concerns. So it's not all glitter. There are some real concerns with the data and the exposure associated with these type of technologies. Highly advise developing an AI usage policy in your organization if you have not. Definitely advise doing at least some basic training with your users on what makes sense, on what to do with AI and what not to do with AI. For instance, you don't want your users going out to a third-party cloud AI service and asking it questions about proprietary information. If you feel like I see your hand, give me 1 second. If you feel like you are in a position to where you need to utilize AI for very sensitive activities, I highly advise you looking at bringing it in-house and maintaining your own chat model. What do you got, Amy?
So we're very concerned about privacy. We do have a policy for our AI, but we're concerned that people are using other things like ChatGPT or any of the other various tools, OpenAI, and putting things out there that are exposing our data. And I was wondering if you knew if there's any type of aggregate service out there that will let you monitor what people are doing on their computers as far as AI goes.
Yeah, so specifically for AI monitoring, not that I'm aware of. That's not to say that there's not. There are plenty of tools that you can use for behavior monitoring, and then you can essentially tune them, only for AI activity. But specifically AI, nothing that I'm aware of. Unfortunately, because these tools are so prevalent, like a lot of things, it becomes an integrity check.
So I'm betting there will be soon if there's not one now.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And, you can use traditional technological tools to lock those down, right? So something as rudimentary as rewriting the local host file on a machine to block out, ChatGPT, OpenAI, et cetera.
Or maybe even using like a group policy to allow plugins. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
ChatGPT. So same concerns. Mark Graves has the same concerns. We're also playing with ChatGPT Teams, horrible naming. Yeah, 100%, which locks down within the workspace. Yeah, and that's really, it's become a very common conversation where organizations are essentially bringing AI in-house to better monitor the usage. Essentially, if I provide you, a company-controlled AI portal to run items across, you're less likely to go out to one of those third-party cloud services. You can work in technical controls, and I don't doubt that here shortly there will be some sort of AI usage monitoring tool available. All right, so future of AI for cybersecurity. Absolutely. Future for AI of cybersecurity. So as I mentioned, it does have its advantages and disadvantages. Specifically, the disadvantage twofold. So the first disadvantage is the threat actors are always going to be using artificial intelligence, whether you are or not. The second disadvantage is the privacy and data concerns. We still, as IT professionals, it all boils down to protecting the data of the organizations that we are engaged with. And so this is no different, right? If we are giving it access to all of our data and we are inputting data and asking it to do things with data, we definitely need to manage that process for sure. However, I don't think that the cons outweigh the pros. All teams can benefit by the implementation of AI, not just security teams. It definitely will help to bridge that skills gap and subsidize your teams to get that extra man on the field. That is the end of my death by slideshow. Happy to have you all with us. Very glad you joined. I can take any more questions if you have them, but if not, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Brian.
I just got one more question came in from Eric Hansen. Do you see that, Chris?
Yeah, so are there limitations to what Copilot for Security can do outside of security? For example, if we have Copilot for Security, will there be responses of not licensed for that, et cetera? Or is that a query for Copilot for 365? I think I understand what you're asking me. So the way Copilot for Security gets its data is via plugins. And when you configure Copilot, and you have the ability to change it, but when you configure Copilot, you select the data sources that it is getting. You can turn those on and off, but if you do not have one of those turned on, it will say, I don't have a plugin for that. And so that's essentially you're not licensed for that response. If it has a plugin for that, it's going to go in and find the data. But if the plugin, if you are not licensed for the plugin, or the plugin is not turned on itself, you will get a response similar to not licensed. It actually says no plugins available or something like that.
One more in from Cedric, Chris.
Yeah, does access to Copilot vary depending on which licensing model, E3, E5, etc.? So if you're talking about Copilot for Security, the access is controlled in the same way a security group would be, where you have owners and members, right? If you are talking about Copilot's access to the data, so you mentioned E3, E5, so there's going to be various features between those licensings. And if you don't have the feature available, yes, it is going to be dependent upon that licensing. For Copilot for 365, regardless of what licensing model you have, Copilot for 365 is an add-on that you will have to pay for separately. I think last time I looked, it's like $400 for a single license for a year. But if you think about, your executives, how much time they're going to save in just, summarizing communications quickly and getting emails out quickly, that $300 to $400 is probably well worth it. All good questions. What else you got? Absolutely, Cedric. All right, I think that might wrap it up, Brian.
Yeah, any last minute questions or comments, guys, before we wrap things up?
I have one. So one of the questions that we had, and it's hard to test as an admin who has access to almost everything, and we're licensed on Copilot as admins. Will users, if they're querying, one of the things that I did is I set up a script that would like stop sharing for anyone, right? So I can run that on all users. So if they've shared something with just a link, not to specific people, that maybe that would help. But what I want to know really is if a general user is using Copilot, will it pull up things they're not supposed to see?
No, so Copilot knows what the access levels of the users are, and
Yep.
it will only give them information that they could find on their own.
Okay, that's perfect. We were going to do some testing next week, but that kind of answers it.
Any other questions or comments, guys? All right, so Thank you all for attending and participating today. Hope you found it insightful and informative. It sounds like a lot of you are just starting to dabble in Copilot and AI with your company. So, over these next couple of weeks, as you continue down that path, if you have any questions or comments or just want to bounce some ideas off Chris for feedback, more than happy to set up a call for that. For those who haven't started in the AI for security area yet and want some help with Copilot, we're more than happy to help you get that started for you guys. Again, thank you for participating. I'll send you everyone the link for the recording early next week, so you can share with your teams internally. And again, if you have any other questions or comments that you think of after we close things up here, you have Chris's information in mind. Feel free to reach out at any time. And
Deb dropped a question there in the chat. What is the best way to start?
Start with Copilot for Security or Copilot for 365?
Security.
Yeah, so Copilot for Security requires a little bit of build out inside of inside of Azure. You need to build out a logs analytics workspace, and then get your 365 features plugged into it. It's not much more complicated than that, but it does require a little build out.
All right, any other last questions, guys, before we shut it down? Awesome. Well,
Definitely appreciate you all joining.
Yeah, thanks for spending some time on your Friday afternoon at the end of the week. We really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions or comments or want to bounce any ideas off of Chris over the next couple of weeks, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.